Book 3, Part 4 of A Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 3, Part 4, August 25th to August 30th, 1862. August 25th, about 12 at night. Sleep is impossible after all that I have heard, so after vainly endeavoring to follow the example of the rest, and sleep like a Stoic, I have lighted my candle, and take to this to induce drowsiness. Just after supper, when Anna and I were sitting with Mrs. Carter in her room, I talking as usual of home, and saying I would be perfectly happy if mother would decide to remain in Baton Rouge and brave the occasional shellings, I heard a well known voice take up some sentence of mine from a dark part of the room, and with a cry of surprise I was hugging Miriam until she was breathless. Such a forlorn creature, so dirty, tired, and fatigued as to be hardly recognizable. We thrust her into a chair and made her speak. She had just come with Charlie, who went after them yesterday, and had left mother and the servants at a kind friend's on the road. I never heard such a story as she told. I was heartsick, but I laughed until Mrs. Badger grew furious with me and the Yankees, and abused me for not abusing them. She says when she entered the house, she burst into tears at the desolation. It was one scene of ruin. Libraries emptied, china smashed, sideboards split open with axes, 3 cedar chests cut open, plundered, and set up on end, all parlor ornaments carried off, even the alabaster Apollo and Diana that Hal valued so much. Her piano, dragged to the center of the parlor, had been abandoned as too heavy to carry off. Her desk lay open with all letters and notes well thumbed and scattered around, while Will's last letter to her was open on the floor with the Yankee stamp of dirty fingers. Mother's portrait, half cut from its frame, stood on the floor. Margaret, who was present at the sacking, told how she had saved father's. It seems that those who wrought destruction in our house were all officers. One jumped on the sofa to cut the picture down Miriam saw the prints of his muddy feet when Margaret cried, "For God's sake, gentlemen, let it be! I'll help you to anything here. He's dead, and the young ladies would rather see the house burn than lose it." "I'll blow your damned brains out," was the gentleman's answer, as he put a pistol to her head, which a brother officer dashed away, and the picture was abandoned for finer sport. All the others were cut up in shreds. Upstairs was the finest fun. Mother's beautiful mahogany armoire, whose single door was an extremely fine mirror, was entered by crashing through the glass, when it was emptied of every article, and the shelves half split and half thrust back crooked. Letters, labeled by the boys "Private," were strewn over the floor. They opened every armoire and drawer, collected every rag to be found, and littered the whole house with them, until the wonder was, where so many rags had been found. Father's armoire was relieved of everything, Gibbes's handsome Damascus sword with the silver scabbard included. All his clothes, George's, Hal's, Jimmy's, were appropriated. They entered my room, broke that fine mirror for sport, pulled down the rods from the bed, and with them pulverized my toilet set, taking also all Lydia's china ornaments I had packed in the washstand. The débris filled my basin and ornamented my bed. My desk was broken open. Over it was spread all my letters and private papers, a diary I kept when I was 12 years old, and sundry tokens of dried roses, etc., which must have been very funny, they all being labeled with the donor's name and the occasion. Fool! How I writhe when I think of all they saw! The invitations to buggy rides, concerts, compliments of, etc. Lily's sewing machine had disappeared, but as mother's was too heavy to move, they merely smashed the needles. In the pillaging of the armoires, they seized a pink flounced muslin of Miriam's, which one officer placed on the end of a bayonet and paraded round with, followed by the others, who slashed it with their swords, crying, "I have struck the damned Secesh! That's the time I cut her!" and continued their sport until the rags could no longer be pierced. One seized my bonnet, with which he decked himself, and ran in the streets. Indeed, all who found such rushed frantically around town by way of frolicking with the things on their heads. They say no frenzy could surpass it. Another snatched one of my calico dresses and a pair of vases that mother had when she was married, and was about to decamp, when a Mrs. Jones jerked them away and carried them to her boarding house, and returned them to mother the other day. Blessed be Heaven, I have a calico dress! Our clothes were used for the vilest purposes, and spread in every corner, at least those few that were not stolen. Aunt Barker's Charles tried his best to defend the property. "Ain't you 'shamed to destroy all dis here, that belongs to a poor widow lady who's got 2 daughters to support?" he asked of an officer who was foremost in the destruction. "Poor! Damn them! I don't know when I have seen a house furnished like this. Look at that furniture!" "They poor!" was the retort; and thereupon the work went bravely on, of making us poor indeed. It would have fared badly with us had we been there. The servants say they broke into the house crying, "Where are those damned Secesh women? We know they are hid in here, and we'll make them dance for hiding from Federal officers." And they could not be convinced we were not there, until they had searched the very garret. Wonder what they would have done? Charles caught a Captain Clark in the streets, when the work was almost over, and begged him to put an end to it. The gentleman went readily, but though the devastation was quite evident, no one was to be seen, and he was about to leave, when, insisting that there was some one there, Charles drew him into my room, dived under the bed, and drew from thence a Yankee captain by one leg, followed by a lieutenant, each with a bundle of the boys' clothes, which they instantly dropped, protesting they were only looking around the house. The gentleman captain carried them off to their superior. Ours was the most shockingly treated house in the whole town. We have the misfortune to be equally feared by both sides, because we will blackguard neither. So the Yankees selected the only house in town that sheltered 3 forlorn women to wreak their vengeance on. From far and near, strangers and friends flocked in to see the ravages committed. Crowds rushed in before, crowds came in after Miriam and mother arrived, all apologizing for the intrusion, but saying they had heard it was a sight never before seen. So they let them examine to their hearts' content, and Miriam says the sympathy of all was extraordinary. A strange gentleman picked up a piece of mother's mirror, which was as thick as his finger, saying, "Madam, I should like to keep this as a memento. I am about to travel through Mississippi, and having seen what a splendid piece of furniture this was, and the state your house is left in, should like to show this as a specimen of Yankee vandalism." William Waller flew to our home to try to save it, but it was too late. They say he burst into tears as he looked around. While on his kind errand, another band of Yankees burst into his house and left not one article of clothing to him, except the suit he had on. The whole talk is about our dreadful treatment at the Yankees' hands. Dr. Day and Dr. Enders, in spite of the assertions of the former, lost nothing. Well, I am beggared. Strange to say, I don't feel it. Perhaps it is the satisfaction of knowing my fate that makes me so cheerful that Mrs. Carter envied my stoicism, while Mrs. Badger felt like beating me because I did not agree that there was no such thing as a gentleman in the Yankee army. I know Major Drum, for one, and that Captain Clark must be 2, and Mr. Biddle is 3, and General Williams. God bless him wherever he is, for he certainly acted like a Christian. The Yankees boasted loudly that if it had not been for him, the work would have been done long ago. And now I am determined to see my home before Yankee shells complete the work that Yankee axes spared. So by sunrise I shall post over to Mr. Elder's, and insist on Charlie taking me to town with him. I hardly think it is many hours off. I feel so settled, so calm, just as though I never meant to sleep again. If only I had a desk, a luxury I have not enjoyed since I left home, I could write for hours still without being sleepy; but this curved attitude is hard on my stiff back, so good night while I lie down to gain strength for a sight they say will make me faint with distress. Nous verrons. If I say I won't, I know I'll not cry. The Brunots lost nothing at all from their house, thank Heaven for the mercy; only they lost all their money in their flight. On the door, on their return, they found written, "Ladies, I have done my best for you," signed by a Yankee soldier, who they suppose to be the one who has made it a habit of continually passing their house. Forgot to say Miriam recovered my guitar from the Asylum, our large trunk, and father's papers, untouched, from Dr. Enders's, and with her piano, the 2 portraits, a few mattresses, all that is left of housekeeping affairs, and father's law books, carried them out of town. For which I say, in all humility, blessed be God, who has spared us so much. Thursday, August 28th. I am satisfied. I have seen my home again. Tuesday I was up at sunrise, and my few preparations were soon completed, and before any one was awake, I walked over to Mr. Elder's, through mud and dew, to meet Charlie. Fortunate was it for me that I started so early, for I found him hastily eating his breakfast and ready to leave. He was very much opposed to my going, and for some time I was afraid he would force me to remain; but at last he consented, perhaps because I did not insist, and with wet feet and without a particle of breakfast, I at length found myself in the buggy on the road home. The ride afforded me a series of surprises. Half the time I found myself halfway out of the little low necked buggy when I thought I was safely in; and the other half I was surprised to find myself really in when I thought I was wholly out; and so on for mile after mile over muddy roads, until we came to a most terrific cross road, where we were obliged to pass, and which is best undescribed. 4 miles from town we stopped at Mrs. Brown's to see mother, and after a few moments' talk, went on our road. I saw the first Yankee camp that Will Pinckney and Colonel Byrd had set fire to, the day of the battle. Such a shocking sight of charred wood, burnt clothes, tents, and all imaginable articles strewn around, I had never before seen. I should have been very much excited, entering the town by the route our soldiers took, but I was not. It all seemed tame and familiar. I could hardly fancy I stood on the very spot where the severest struggle had taken place. The next turn of the road brought us to 2 graves, one on each side of the road, the resting place of 2 who fell that day. They were merely left in the ditch where they fell, and earth from the side was pulled over them. When Miriam passed, parts of their coats were sticking out of the grave, but some kind hand had scattered fresh earth over them when I saw them. Beyond, the sight became more common. I was told that their hands and feet were visible from many. And one poor fellow lay unburied just as he had fallen, with his horse across him, and both skeletons. That sight I was spared, as the road near which he was lying was blocked up by trees, so we were forced to go through the woods to enter, instead of passing by, the Catholic graveyard. In the woods we passed another camp our men destroyed, while the torn branches above testified to the number of shells our men had braved to do the work. Next to Mr. Barbee's were the remains of a third camp that was burned, and a few more steps made me suddenly hold my breath, for just before us lay a dead horse with all the flesh still hanging, which was hardly endurable. Close by lay a skeleton, whether of man or horse I did not wait to see. Not a human being appeared until we reached the penitentiary, which was occupied by our men. After that, I saw crowds of wagons moving furniture out, but not a creature that I knew. Just back of our house was all that remained of a nice brick cottage, namely, 4 crumbling walls. The offense was that the husband was fighting for the Confederates, so the wife was made to suffer, and is now homeless, like many thousands besides. It really seems as though God wanted to spare our homes. The frame dwellings adjoining were not touched, even. The town was hardly recognizable, and required some skill to avoid the corners blocked up by trees, so as to get in at all. Our house could not be reached by the front, so we left the buggy in the back yard, and running through the lot without stopping to examine the storeroom and servants' rooms that opened wide, I went through the alley, and entered by the front door. Fortunate was it for this record that I undertook to describe the sacking only from Miriam's account. If I had waited until now, it would never have been mentioned, for as I looked around, to attempt such a thing seemed absurd. I stood in the parlor in silent amazement, and in answer to Charlie's "Well?" I could only laugh. It was so hard to realize. As I looked for each well known article, I could hardly believe that Abraham Lincoln's officers had really come so low down as to steal in such a wholesale manner. The papier mâché workbox Miriam had given me was gone. The baby sack I was crocheting, with all knitting needles and wools, gone also. Of all the beautiful engravings of Annapolis that Will Pinckney had sent me, there remained a single one. Gentlemen, my name is written on each. Not a book remained in the parlor, except "Idylls of the King," which contained my name also, and which, together with the door plate, was the only case in which the name of Morgan was spared. They must have thought we were related to John Morgan, and wreaked their vengeance on us for that reason. Thanks for the honor, but there is not the slightest connection. Where they did not carry off articles bearing our name, they cut it off, as in the visiting cards, and left only the first name. Every book of any value or interest, except Hume and Gibbon, was "borrowed" permanently. I regretted Macaulay more than all the rest. Brother's splendid French histories went too, all except "L'Histoire de la Bastille." However, as they spared father's law libraries, all except one volume they used to support a flour barrel with while they emptied it near the parlor door, we ought to be thankful. The dining room was very funny. I looked around for the cut glass celery and preserve dishes that were to be part of my "dot," as mother always said, together with the champagne glasses that had figured on the table the day that I was born, but there remained nothing. There was plenty of split up furniture, though. I stood in mother's room before the shattered armoir, which I could hardly believe the same that I had smoothed my hair before, as I left home 3 weeks previously. Father's was split across and the lock torn off, and in the place of the hundreds of articles it contained, I saw 2 bonnets, at the sight of which I actually sat down to laugh. One was mother's velvet, which looked very much like a football in its present condition. Mine was not to be found, as the officers forgot to return it. Wonder who has my imperial? I know they never saw a handsomer one, with its black velvet, purple silk, and ostrich feathers. I went to my room. Gone was my small paradise. Had this shocking place ever been habitable? The tall mirror squinted at me from 1,000 broken angles. It looked so knowing. I tried to fancy the Yankee officers being dragged from under my bed by the leg, thanks to Charles, but it seemed too absurd, so I let them alone. My desk! What a sight! The central part I had kept as a little curiosity shop, with all my little trinkets and keepsakes, of which a large proportion were from my gentlemen friends. I looked for all I had left, found only a piece of the McRae, which, as it was labelled in full, I was surprised they had spared. Precious letters I found under heaps of broken china and rags. All my notes were gone, with many letters. I looked for a letter of poor in cipher, with the key attached, and the name signed in plain hand. I knew it would hardly be agreeable to him to have it read, and it certainly would be unpleasant to me to have it published, but I could not find it. Miriam thinks she saw something answering the description somewhere, though. Bah! What is the use of describing such a scene? Many suffered along with us, though none so severely. Indeed, the Yankees cursed loudly at those who did not leave anything worth stealing. They cannot complain of us on that score. All our handsome Brussels carpets, together with Lydia's fur, were taken, too. What did they not take? In the garret, in its darkest corner, a whole gilt edged china set of Lydia's had been overlooked. So I set to work and packed it up, while Charlie packed her furniture in a wagon to send to her father. It was now 3 o'clock, and with my light linen dress thrown off, I was standing over a barrel putting in cups and saucers as fast as I could wrap them in the rags that covered the floor, when Mr. Larguier sent me a nice little dinner. I had been so many hours without eating, 19, I think, during 3 of which I had slept, that I had lost all appetite; but nevertheless I ate it, to show my appreciation. If I should hereafter think that the quantity of rags was exaggerated, let me here state that after I had packed the barrel and china with them, it made no perceptible diminution of the pile. As soon as I had finished my task, Charlie was ready to leave again, so I left town without seeing or hearing any one or anything except what lay in my path. As we drove out of the gate, I begged Charlie to let me get my bird, as I heard Charles Barker had him. A man was dispatched, and in a few minutes returned with my Jimmy. I have since heard that Tiche deserted him the day of the battle, as I so much feared she would, and that Charles found him late in the evening, and took charge of him. With my pet once more with me, we drove off again. I cast many a longing look at the graveyard, but knowing Charlie did not want to stop, I said nothing, though I had been there but once in 3 months, and that once 6 weeks ago. I could see where the fence had been thrown down by our soldiers as they charged the Federals, but it was now replaced, though many a picket was gone. Once more I stopped at Mrs. Brown's, while Charlie went on to Clinton, leaving me to drive mother here in the morning. Early yesterday, after seeing Miriam's piano and the mattresses packed up and on the road, we started off in the buggy, and after a tedious ride through a melting sun, arrived here about 3 o'clock, having again missed my dinner, which I kept a profound secret until supper time. By next Ash Wednesday I will have learned how to fast without getting sick. Though very tired, I sat sewing until after sunset, dictating a page and a half to Anna, who was writing to Howell. August 29th, Clinton, Louisiana. Noah's duck has found another resting place. Yesterday I was interrupted while writing to pack up for another move, it being impossible to find a boarding house in the neighborhood. We heard of some about here, and Charlie had engaged a house for his family, where the servants were already settled, so I hurried off to my task. No easy one either, considering the heat and length of time allowed. This time I ate dinner as I packed again. About 4, finding Miriam did not come to Mr. Elder's as she promised, I started over to General Carter's with her clothes, and found her just getting into the buggy to ride over, as I arrived, warm, tired, hardly able to stand. After taking her over, the General sent the buggy back for Mrs. Carter and myself, and soon we were all assembled waiting for the cars. At last, determining to wait for them near the track, we set off again, General Carter driving me in his buggy. I love General Carter. Again, after so many kind invitations, he told me he was sorry we would not remain with him. If we were content, he would be only too happy to have us with him; and spoke so kindly that I felt as though I had a Yankee ball in my throat. I was disposed to be melancholy anyway. I could not say many words without choking. I was going from the kindest of friends to a country where I had none at all, so could not feel very gay. As we reached the track, the cars came shrieking along. There was a pause, a scuffle, during which the General placed me and my bird in a seat, while Lilly, Charlie, Miriam, mother, 5 children, and 2 servants, with all the baggage, were thrown aboard some way, when with a shriek and a jerk we were off again, without a chance of saying good bye even. I enjoyed that ride. It had but one fault, and that was that it came to an end. I would have wished it to spin along until the war was over, or we in a settled home. But it ended at last, to Jimmy's great relief, for he was too frightened to move even, and only ventured a timid chirp if the car stopped, as if to ask, "Is it over?" Nothing occurred of any interest, except once a little boy sent us slightly off the track by meddling with the brakes. Landed at sunset, it is hard to fancy a more forlorn crew, while waiting at the depot to get the baggage off, before coming to the house. We burst out laughing as we looked at each lengthened face. Such a procession through the straggling village has hardly been seen before. How we laughed at our forlorn plight as we trudged through the hilly streets they have no pavements here looking like emigrants from the old country, as we have watched them in New Orleans. At the house, we found Tiche laid up. The loaded wagon, with its baggage, 4 mules, 3 grown servants, and 4 children, was precipitated from a bridge 25 feet high, by the breaking of the before mentioned causeway, and landed with the whole concern in deep water below. Wonderful to relate, not a life was lost. The mattress on which the negroes remained seated floated them off into shallow water. The only one hurt was Tiche, who had her leg severely sprained. The baggage was afterwards fished out, rather wet. In the mud next morning it happened late at night Dophy found a tiny fancy bottle that she had secreted from the Yankees, a present from Clemmy Lusenberg it was, and one of 2 things left in my curiosity shop by the Yankees. After seeing everything in, we started off for the hotel, where we arrived after dark, rather tired, I think. Not a comfortable house either, unless you call a bare, unfurnished, dirty room, without shutter or anything else, comfortable; particularly when you are to sleep on the floor with 4 children and 3 grown people and a servant. After breakfast, we came here until we can find a place to settle in, which Mr. Marsden has promised to attend to for us. It is rather rough housekeeping yet, but Lilly has not yet got settled. Our dinner was rather primitive. There was a knife and fork to carve the meat, and then it was finished with spoons. I sat on the floor with my plate and a piece of corn bread (flour not to be bought at any price), and ate with my fingers, a new experience. I found that water can be drunk out of a cup. Ouf! I am tired. August 30th. Still no prospect of a lodging, so here we remain. I never before lived in a house without a balcony, and have only now found out how inconvenient it is. The whole establishment consists of 2 rooms on each side of a passage as wide as the front door; and as it has a very low ceiling, with no opening and no shade near, it is decidedly the warmest spot I ever inhabited. We all sleep on the floor, and keep our clothes in our trunks, except Lilly, who has an armoir without doors. Knives and forks for dinner to day, though the table still consists of a single plank. The house really has a suffocating effect on me, there is such a close look about it. The front is fully a foot below the level of the street, while quite a flight of steps leads from the back door to the yard. In fact, the whole town consists of abrupt little mounds. It is rather a pretty place, but Heaven save me from the misery of living in it! Miriam is crazy to remain; even advocates that dirty, bare, shutterless boarding house where we passed the first night, from what attraction I cannot imagine. I am just as anxious to get into the country. I would hate the dull round of this little place. I prefer solitude where I can do as I please without being observed. Here we are as well known by people we never before heard of as though we were fellow citizens. End of Book 3, Part 4. Part 5 of A Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 3, Part 5, September 1st to September 10th, 1862. September 1st, Monday. I woke up this morning, and to my great surprise find that summer has already passed away, and that we have already entered the first month of fall. Where has the summer gone to? Since the taking of Fort Jackson, the days have gone by like a dream. I had hardly realized spring, when now I find it is autumn. I am content to let the time fly, though, as every day brings us nearer peace, or something else. How shockingly I write! Will I ever again have a desk or a table to write on? At present my seat is a mattress, and my knee my desk, and that is about the only one I have had since the 2nd of August. This is the dreariest day I have seen for some time. Outside, it has been raining since daybreak, and inside no one feels especially bright or cheerful. I sometimes wish mother would carry out her threat and brave the occasional shellings at Baton Rouge. I would dare anything to be at home again. I know that the Yankees have left us little besides the bare house, but I would be grateful for the mere shelter of the roof. I often fancy how we will miss little articles that we thought necessary to our comfort before, when we return. And the shoes I paid $5 for, and wore a single time? I am wishing I had them, now that I am almost barefooted and cannot find a pair in the whole country. Would it not be curious if one of these days while traveling in the North, if I ever travel again, I should find some well-loved object figuring in a strange house as a trophy of the battle of Baton Rouge? I should have to seek for them in some very low house, perhaps. Respectable people had very little to do with such disgraceful work, I fancy. Suppose I should see father's cigar stand, for instance, or Miriam's little statues. I wonder if the people would have the conscience to offer to return them. A young lady, passing by one of the pillaged houses, expressed her surprise at seeing an armoir full of women's and children's clothes being emptied, and the contents tied up in sheets. "What can you do with such things?" she asked a soldier who seemed more zealous than the rest. "Ain't I got a wife and 4 children in the North?" was the answer. So we, who have hardly clothes enough for our own use, are stripped to supply Northerners. One would think that I had no theme save the wreck of our house if they read this. But I take it all out in here. I believe I must be made of wood or some other tough material not to feel it more. I sometimes ask myself if it is because I did not care for home that I take it so quietly now. But I know that is not it. I was wild about it before I knew what had happened. Since I learned all, few are the words that have escaped my lips concerning it. Perhaps it is because I have the satisfaction of knowing what all women crave for, the worst. Indeed, it is a consolation in such days as these, when truth concerning either side is difficult to discover. The certainty of anything, fortune or misfortune, is comfort to me. I really feel sorry for the others who suffered, but it does not strike me that sympathy is necessary in our case. Mrs. Flynn came to Lilly's room when she heard of it, well prepared for sympathy, with a large handkerchief and a profusion of tears, when she was horrified to find both her and Miriam laughing over the latter's description of some comical scene that met her sight in one of the rooms. Seems to me that tears on all occasions come in as the 40th article to the articles of belief of some people. September 3d. Political news it would be absurd to record, for our information is more than limited, being frequently represented by a blank. Of the 13 battles that Gibbes has fought in, I know the names of 4 only: Bull Run, Stonebridge, Port Republic, and Cedar Run. Think of all I have yet to hear! To day comes the news of another grand affair, the defeat of McClellan, Pope, and Burnside combined. If I dared believe it! But accounts are too meagre as yet. Both Gibbes and George were in it, if there was a fight, and perhaps Jimmy, too. Well, I must wait in patience. We have lost so much already that God will surely spare those 3 to us. Oh, if they come again, if we can meet once more, what will the troubles of the last 6 months signify? If I dared hope that next summer would bring us peace! I always prophesy it is just 6 months off. But do I believe it? Indeed, I don't know what will become of us if it is delayed much longer. If we could only get home, it would be another thing; but boarding, how long will mother's $250 last? And that is all the money she has. As to the claims, amounting to a small fortune, she might as well burn them. They will never be paid. But if we get home, what will we do for bedding? The Yankees did not leave us a single comfort, and only 2 old bars and a pair of ragged sheets, which articles are not to be replaced at any price in the Confederacy, so we must go without. How glad I am that we gave all our blankets to our soldiers last summer! So much saved from the Yankees. Poor Lavinia! She fancies us comfortably settled at home. I dare say she spends all her time in picturing to herself what we may be doing, and recalling each piece of furniture the rooms contained. Wonder if she would not be shocked if the real scene were suddenly revealed to her, and she should see the desolated house, and see us fugitives in a strange town. Wonder how the cry of "Where are those 3 damned Secesh women?" would have struck her, had she heard the strange oaths and seen the eager search which followed. I dare say it would have frightened her more than it did me when I was told of it. William Waller says it is God's mercy that we had escaped already, for we certainly would have suffered. I hardly think we could have been harmed, though, and shall always regret that we did not return immediately after the battle. It took them from that day to the evacuation to finish the work, and I rather think that our presence would have protected the house. Our servants they kindly made free, and told them they must follow them, the officers. Margaret was boasting the other day of her answer. "I don't want to be any freer than I is now. I'll stay with my mistress," when Tish shrewdly remarked, "Pshaw! Don't you know that if I had gone, you'd have followed me?" The conduct of our servants is beyond praise. 5,000 negroes followed their Yankee brothers from the town and neighborhood, but ours remained. During the fight, or flight rather, a fleeing officer stopped to throw a musket in Charles Barker's hands, and bade him fight for his liberty. Charles drew himself up, saying, "I am only a slave, but I am a Secesh nigger, and won't fight in such a crew." Exit Yankee, continuing his flight down to the riverside. September 4th. I hear to day that the Brunots have returned to Baton Rouge, determined to await the grand finale there. They and 2 other families alone remain. With these exceptions, and a few Dutch and Irish who cannot leave, the town is perfectly deserted by all except the Confederate soldiers. I wish I was with them. If all chance of finding lodgings here is lost, and mother remains with Lilly, as she sometimes seems more than half inclined, and Miriam goes to Linwood, as she frequently threatens, I believe I will take a notion, too, and go to Mrs. Brunot. I would rather be there, in all the uncertainty, expecting to be shelled or burnt out every hour, than here. Ouf! What a country! Next time I go shopping, I mean to ask some clerk, out of curiosity, what they do sell in Clinton. The following is a list of a few of the articles that shopkeepers actually laugh at you if you ask for: glasses, flour, soap, starch, coffee, candles, matches, shoes, combs, guitar strings, bird seed, in short, everything that I have heretofore considered as necessary to existence. If any one had told me I could have lived off of cornbread, a few months ago, I would have been incredulous. Now I believe it, and return an inward grace for the blessing at every mouthful. I have not tasted a piece of wheat bread since I left home, and shall hardly taste it again until the war is over. I do not like this small burg. It is very straggling and pretty, but I would rather not inhabit it. We are as well known here as though we carried our cards on our faces; and it is peculiarly disagreeable to me to overhear myself spoken about by people I don't know, as "There goes Miss Morgan," as that young man, for instance, remarked this morning to a crowd, just as I passed. It is not polite, to say the least. Will Carter was here this morning, and told me he saw Theodore Pinckney in the streets. I suppose he is on his way home, and think he will be a little disappointed in not finding us at Linwood as he expects, and still more so to hear he passed through the very town where we were staying, without knowing it. Beech Grove, September 6th, Saturday. Another perch for Noah's duck. Where will I be in a week or two from this? I shall make a mark, 20 pages from here, and see where I shall be when I reach it. Here, most probably; but oh, if I could then be at home! General Carter, who spent the evening with us day before yesterday, remarked that the first thing he heard, as he reached town, was that all the gentlemen and ladies of Clinton were hunting for country lodgings for us. It was pretty much the case. The General was as kind as ever, bless his gray head, and made us promise to go back to Linwood with him when he passes back next week. This is the way we keep the promise, coming out here. Early yesterday morning we received a note from Eliza Haynes, one of our indefatigable agents, saying her grandmother, Mrs. McKay, had consented to receive us, and would come for us in the evening. Immediately my packing task was begun; but imagine my disappointment, just as I finished one trunk, to hear mother announce her determination to let us go alone, while she remained with Lilly. Prayers, entreaties, tears, arguments, all failed, and we were forced to submit. So with a heart fuller than I can express, I repacked the trunk with Miriam's and my clothing, and got ready to depart. In the evening the carriage drove up to the door, with Eliza and her grandmother, and with a hasty and rather choky good bye to Lilly and mother, we were hurried in, and in another moment were off. I fancied the house would be north of Clinton, so of course the horses took the road south. Then I decided on a white cottage on the left of the road, and about 2 miles out, found that it was to the right, not painted, and no cottage at all, but a nondescript building besides. 'Twas ever thus, from childhood's hour. When did I ever fancy anything exactly as it was? But the appearance does not affect the house, which is really very comfortable, though apparently unfinished. The same objection might be made to it that I made to Mrs. Moore's, for there is not a shutter on the place. But fine shade trees take their place, and here I do not feel the want of them so much, as our room is in the back of the house, to the west, where the rising sun cannot salute my nose as it did at Mrs. Moore's. As to what effect the setting sun has, I must wait for the evening to decide, though I always enjoy that. At Greenwell we used to walk a mile away from home to see the sun set in an open field. I find Mrs. Mackay an excellent, plain old lady, with neither airs nor pretensions, and very kind hearted. Here she lives alone, with the exception of an orphan girl called Jane, whose position, half menial, half equal, it would be hard to define. Poor girl! The name of orphan alone was enough to make me sorry for her. She must be Friday's child, she is so ready and willing. Eliza, who it seems stays a great deal with her grandmother, is one of the brightest little girls I have seen for a long while. She sings and plays on the piano with a style and assurance that I can only mutely covet. Why cannot I have the confidence I see all others possess? She took me to the gin house last evening, though I could not see much, as it was almost sunset when we arrived. An early tea, and singing, and music after, completed our evening, and then we were shown to our room. Mrs. Mackay has only room for us two, so it is fortunate that mother would not come. She says she wants us to spend a few days with her, to see if we like it, or if we will be willing to be separated from mother. In the mean time, we can look around for lodgings in a larger and more comfortable place, where we can be together. She tells such stories about the house Lilly lives in, of its age and unhealthiness, that I am frightened about mother. She says she will die if she stays there this month. Miriam and Eliza have gone to town to see them, and are then going to Mrs. George's to see if she can accommodate us. I wanted to have a splendid dream last night, but failed. It was pleasant, though, to dream of welcoming George and Gibbes back. Jimmy I could not see, and George was in deep mourning. I dreamed of fainting when I saw him, a novel sensation, since I never experienced it awake. But I speedily came to, and insisted on his pulling Henry Walsh's red hair for his insolence, which he promised to do instantly. How absurd! Dreams, dreams! That pathetic "Miss Sarah, do you ever dream?" comes vividly back to me sometimes. Dream? Don't I? Not the dreams that he meant, but royal purple dreams that De Quincey could not purchase with his opium. Dreams that I would not forego for all the inducements that could be offered. I go to sleep and pay a visit to heaven or fairyland. I have white wings, and with another float in rosy clouds and look down on the moving world; or I have the power to raise myself in the air without wings, and silently float wherever I will, loving all things and feeling that God loves me. I have heard Paul preach to the people while I stood on a fearful rock above. I have been to strange lands and great cities. I have talked with people I have never beheld. Charlotte Brontë has spent a week with me, in my dreams, and together we have talked of her sad life. Shakespeare and I have discussed his works, seated tête à tête over a small table. He pointed out the character of each of his heroines, explaining what I could not understand when awake, and closed the lecture with, "You have the tenderest heart I have ever read or sung of," which compliment, considering it as original with him rather than myself, waked me up with surprise. Clinton, September 9th, Tuesday. Back again! For how long, I know not. At sunset Saturday, Eliza and Miriam returned to Mrs. Mackay with Nannie Davidson. Mother had proved obdurate and refused to leave Clinton, so they had all gone on, and spent the day with Mrs. Haynes, instead of going to Mrs. George's. After my quiet, solitary day, I was glad to see them again, particularly as they brought confirmation of the great victory in Virginia. It is said the enemy were cut off from Washington, and that we were pursuing them. O my brothers! If God will only spare them! I envy Lydia, who is so near them, and knows all, and can take care of them if they are hurt. It will be several days at least before we can hear from them, if we hear at all. For Jimmy has never yet written a line, and George has written but once since the taking of the forts, and that was before the battle of Chickahominy. We can only wait patiently. Perhaps General Carter will bring us news. Mrs. Haynes sent a very pressing invitation for us to spend the next day with her, so although it was Sunday, we went. I am becoming dreadfully irreligious. I have not been to church since Mr. Gierlow went to Europe last July. It is perfectly shocking, but the Yankees have kept me running until all pious dispositions have been shaken out of me, so they are to blame. Like heathens, we called on Miss Comstock as we passed through town, and spent an hour with her. Landed at Mr. Haynes's, we had ample time to look around before he and his wife got back from church. Here again I found what seems to be the prevailing style of the country: widespread doors and windows, with neither blinds nor shade trees to keep off the glare of the sun. The dining room was a wide hall, where the rising sun shone in your face at breakfast, and at dinner, being directly overhead, seemed to shine in at both ends at once. A splendid arrangement for a fire worshipper, but I happened to be born in America instead of Persia, so failed to appreciate it. September 10th. Yesterday I was interrupted to undertake a very important task. The evening before, mother and Lilly happened to be in a store where two officers were buying materials for making shirts, and volunteered to make them for them, which offer they gladly accepted, though neither party knew the other. They saw that they were friends of Charlie, so had no scruples about offering their services. The gentlemen saw that they were ladies, and very kind ones besides, so made no difficulty about accepting. Lilly undertook one of purple merino, and I took a dark blue one. Miriam nominally helped her, but her very sore finger did not allow her to do much. Mother slightly assisted me, but I think Lilly and I had the best of the task. All day we worked, and when evening came, continued sewing by the light of these miserable home-made candles. Even then we could not finish, but had to get up early this morning, as the gentlemen were to leave for Port Hudson at 9 o'clock. We finished in good time, and their appearance recompensed us for our trouble. Lily's was trimmed with folds of blue from mine, around collar, cuffs, pockets, and down the front band, while mine was pronounced a chef d'oeuvre, trimmed with bias folds of tiny red and black plaid. With their fresh colors and shining pearl buttons, they were really very pretty. We sent word that we would be happy to make as many as they chose for themselves or their friends; and the eldest, with many fears that it was an imposition and we were too good, and much more of the same kind, left another one with Charlie for us. We cannot do too much, or even enough, for our soldiers. I believe that is the universal sentiment of the women of the South. Well, but how did we get back here? I hardly know. It seems to me we are being swayed by some kind of destiny which impels us here or there, with neither rhyme nor reason, and whether we will or no. Such homeless, aimless, purposeless, wandering individuals are rarely seen. From one hour to another, we do not know what is to become of us. We talk vaguely of going home, when the Yankees go away. When will that be? One day there is not a boat in sight; the next two or three stand off from shore to see what is being done, ready, at the first sight of warlike preparation, to burn the town down. It is particularly unsafe since the news from Virginia, when the gunboats started from Bayou Goula, shelling the coast at random, and destroying everything that was within reach, report says. Of course we cannot return to our homes when commissioned officers are playing the part of pirates. burning, plundering, and destroying at will, with neither law nor reason. Donaldsonville they burned before I left Baton Rouge, because some fool fired a shotgun at a gunboat some miles above. Bayou Sara they burned while we were at General Carter's, for some equally reasonable excuse. The fate of Baton Rouge hangs on a still more slender thread. I would give worlds if it were all over. At Mrs. Haynes's we remained all night, as she sent the carriage back without consulting us. Monday we came to town and spent the day with Lilly. How it was, I can't say, but we came to the conclusion that it was best to quit our then residence, and either go back to Linwood, or to a Mrs. Somebody, who offered to take us as boarders. We went back to Mrs. McKay's to tell her of our determination, and in the morning took leave of her and came back home. We hear so much news, piece by piece, that one would imagine some definite result would follow, and bring us peace before long. The Virginia news, after being so great and cheering, has suddenly ceased to come. No one knows the final result. The last report was that we held Arlington Heights. Why not Washington, consequently? Cincinnati, at last accounts, lay at our mercy. From Covington, Kirby Smith had sent over a demand for its surrender in 2 hours. Would it not be glorious to avenge New Orleans by such a blow? But since last night the telegraph is silent. News has just come of some nice little affair between our militia in Opelousas and the Yankees from New Orleans, in which we gave them a good thrashing, besides capturing arms, prisoners, and ammunition. "It never rains but it pours," is George's favorite proverb. With it comes the rumor that the Yankees are preparing to evacuate the city. If it could be! Oh, if God would only send them back to their own country, and leave ours in peace! I wish them no greater punishment than that they may be returned to their own homes, with the disgrace of their outrages here ever before their eyes. That would kill an honest man, I am sure. End of Book 3, Part 5. VI. Of a Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary, by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 3, Part 6, September 14th to September 24th, 1862. Sunday, September 14th, 1862. I have been so busy making Lieutenant Bourge's shirt that I have not had time to write, besides having very little to write about. So my industry saved my paper, and spared these pages a vast amount of trash. I would not let any one touch Lieutenant Bourge's shirt except myself, and last evening, when I held it up completed, the loud praises it received satisfied me it would answer. Miriam and Miss Ripley declared it the prettiest ever made. It is dark purple merino. The bosom I tucked with pleats 1/4 of an inch deep, all the way up to the collar, and stitched a narrow crimson silk braid up the centre to hold it in its place. Around the collar, cuffs, pockets, and band down the front, the red cord runs, forming a charming contrast to the dark foundation. Indeed, I devoted the sole article the Yankees let fall from my 2 work boxes, a bunch of soutache, to the work. Large white pearl buttons completed the description, and my shirt is really as quiet, subdued, and pretty a one as I ever saw. I should first hear the opinion of the owner, though. If he does not agree with all the others, I shall say he has no taste. I got a long, sweet letter from Sophie on Friday that made me happy for the whole day. They were about leaving for Alexandria. I was glad to hear they would be out of danger, but still I was sorry they were going so far away. I have been laying 100 wild schemes to reach Baton Rouge and spend a day or two with them, which is impossible now. Sophie writes just as she talks, and that means remarkably well, so I can at least have the pleasure of corresponding. At Dr. Carnal's they will be out of the reach of all harm and danger, so I ought to rejoice. There is one thing in which Sophie and I agree, and that is in making Stonewall Jackson our hero. Talk of Beauregard! He never had my adoration; but Stonewall is the greatest man of the age, decidedly. Still no authentic reports of the late battles in Virginia. I say late, referring to those fought 2 weeks ago. From the Federal accounts, glowing as they usually are, I should gather the idea that their rout was complete. I cannot imagine why we can hear nothing more from our own side. I think my first act on my return home will be to take a cup of coffee and a piece of bread, two luxuries of which I have been deprived for a long while. Miriam vows to devour an unheard of number of biscuits, too. How many articles we considered as absolutely necessary before, have we now been obliged to dispense with? 9 months of the year I reveled in ice, thought it impossible to drink water without it. Since last November I have tasted it but once, and that once by accident. And oh yes, I caught some hailstones one day at Linwood. Ice cream, lemonade, and sponge cake was my chief diet. It was a year last July since I tasted the two first, and one since I have seen the last. Bread I believed necessary to life; vegetables senseless. The former I never see, and I have been forced into cultivating at least a toleration of the latter. Snap beans I can actually swallow; sweet potatoes I really like; and one day at Dr. Nolan's I bolted a mouthful of tomatoes, and afterwards kept my seat with the heroism of a martyr. These are the minor trials of war. If that were all! If coarse, distasteful food were the only inconvenience! When I think of what Lavinia must suffer so far from us, and in such ignorance of our condition, our trials seem nothing in comparison to hers; and think how uneasy Brother must be, hearing of the battle, and not knowing where we fled to, for he has not heard from us for almost 2 months. In return, we are uneasy about him and Sister. If New Orleans is attacked, what will become of them with all those children? Tuesday, September 16th. Yesterday, Miriam determined to go to Linwood, and consequently I had a severe task of trunk packing, one of my greatest delights, however. I hate to see any one pack loosely or in a slovenly manner. Perhaps that is the reason I never let any one do it if I am able to stand. This morning was appointed as our day for leaving, but I persuaded her to wait until to morrow, in hope that either the General or news from Virginia would arrive this evening. Bless this village! It is the meanest place for news that I ever was in. Not a word can be gathered, except what is false or unfounded, and they are even tired of that in the last few days. Talk of Baton Rouge turning Yankee, as the report went here. Of the 3 or 4 there who took the oath, not one can be compared to some loyal citizens of this small burg. Why, I talked to 2 gentlemen yesterday who, if it were not for the disgrace and danger incurred by bearing the name, I should style Union men, and talked, or rather listened to them, until my spirits were reduced to the lowest ebb. People were shocked at our daring to believe there lived gentlemen and Christians in the North, I mean those wild fanatics who could only take in one idea at a time, and rarely divested their brains of that one to make room for a newer one, were shocked at our belief. But if they could converse with a few here that I could point out, our gnat of common sense would be swallowed by this behemoth of heterodoxy. This morning Mrs. Barr, Miss Bernard, and a Miss Mudd came to town and surprised us by a most unexpected visit. They spent the day with us, and have just now driven off on their return home, through this drizzly, misting evening. A while ago a large cavalry company passed, at the corner, on their way from Port Hudson to Camp Moore, the report is. They raised their hats to us, seeing us at the gate, and we waved our handkerchiefs in return, each with a silent "God bless you," I am sure. As though to prove my charge unjust, news comes pouring in. Note we a few items, to see how many will prove false. First, we have taken Baltimore without firing a gun. Maryland has risen en masse to join our troops. Longstreet and Lee are marching on Washington from the rear. The Louisiana troops are ordered home to defend their own State, thank God! If it will only bring the boys back. Then comes tidings of 9 gunboats at Baton Rouge, Ponchatoula on the railroad taken by Yankees, Camp Moore and 3 batteries ditto. Not so cheering. If that is so, Clinton lies within reach, being 35 miles off. Leaving much of the most valuable portion of our clothing here, the Yankees will probably appropriate what little they spared us, and leave us fairly destitute; for we take only summer clothes to Linwood. I have plenty of underclothes, but the other day, when I unpacked the large trunk from Dr. Enders's, I found I had just 2 dresses for winter: a handsome blue silk I bought just 2 years ago last spring, and one heavy blue merino that does not fit me. What an outfit for winter! Miriam has 2 poplins and a black silk, and mother a wine colored merino only. But each of us is blessed with a warm cloak, and are correspondingly grateful. I was confident I had saved my green, dark blue, and brown silk dresses, but the Yankees saved them instead for me, or their suffering sweethearts, rather. On the other hand, taking so many necessary articles to Linwood, the risk of losing them is the same. An attack on Port Hudson is apprehended, and if it falls, General Carter's house will be decidedly unsafe from Yankee vengeance. The probability is that it will burn, as they have been daily expecting ever since the Yankees occupied Baton Rouge. The risk seems equal either way. Go or stay, the danger seems the same. Shall we go, then, for variety, or die here of stagnation while waiting for the Yankees to make up their minds? I would rather be at neither place just now. In fact, I could hardly name the place I should like to be in now, unless it were Europe or the Sandwich Islands. But I love Linwood and its dear inhabitants, and under other circumstances should be only too happy to be there. I was regretting the other day that our life was now so monotonous; almost longed for the daily alarms we had when under Yankee rule in Baton Rouge. Stirring times are probably ahead. Linwood, September 17th, Wednesday. Still floating about. This morning after breakfast, General Carter made his appearance, and in answer to his question as to whether we were ready to leave with him, Miriam replied, "Yes, indeed," heartily, glad to get away from Clinton, where I have detained her ever since the day Theodore returned home, to her great disgust. As our trunk was already packed, it did not take many minutes to get ready, and in a little while, with a protracted good bye, we were on our way to the depot, which we reached some time before the cars started. Though glad to leave Clinton, I was sorry to part with mother. For 10 days she has been unable to walk, with a sore on her leg below the knee, and I want to believe she will miss me while I am away. I could not leave my bird in that close, ill ventilated house. He has never sung since I recovered him, and I attribute his ill health or low spirits to that unhealthy place; and thought Linwood might be beneficial to him, too, so brought him with me, to see what effect a breath of pure air might have. We were the only ladies on the cars, except Mrs. Brown, who got off halfway; but in spite of that, had a very pleasant ride, as we had very agreeable company. The train only stopped 13 times in the 20 miles, 5 times to clear the brushwood from the telegraph lines, once running back a mile to pick up a passenger, and so on, to the great indignation of many of the passengers aboard, who would occasionally cry out, "Hello! If this is the clearing up train, we had better send for a hand car!" "What the devil's the matter now?" until the General gravely assured them that it was an old habit of this very accommodating train, which in summer time stopped whenever the passengers wished to pick blackberries on the road. Many soldiers were aboard on their way to Port Hudson to rejoin their companies. One gallant one offered me a drink of water from his canteen, which I accepted out of mere curiosity to see what water from such a source tasted of. To my great surprise, I found it tasted just like any other. The General introduced a Mr. Crawford to us, who took the seat next to me, as the one next to Miriam was already occupied, and proved a very pleasant and talkative compagnon de voyage. General Carter's query as to my industry since he had seen me, brought my acknowledgment of having made 2 shirts, one of which I sent yesterday. Who to, was the next question. I gave the name, adding that I did not know the gentleman, and he was under the impression that it was made by mother. "I'll see that he is undeceived!" cried the General. "Hanged if I don't tell him!" 30th Louisiana, you say?" queried Mr. Crawford. "That is the very one I am going to. I will tell him myself." So my 2 zealous champions went on, the General ending with, "See to it, Crawford, Mrs. Morgan shall not have the credit," as though there was any great merit in sewing for one's countrymen. Our new acquaintance handed me from the cars as we reached Linwood, and stood talking while the accommodating train slowly rolled out its freight. He told me he was going to send me a tiny sack of coffee, which proposition, as it did not meet with the slightest encouragement, will of course never be thought of again. I noticed, too, on the train, one of the Arkansas's crew, the same who, though scarcely able to stand on a severely wounded foot, made such a fuss about riding in a carriage, while real ladies had to walk. Of course he did not recognize us, any more than we would have known him if Dr. Brown had not pointed him out. I hear all of them are at Port Hudson. Anna told me, as we got here, that Dr. Addison, the one I disliked because he was so scrupulously neat while the others were dressed, or rather undressed, for working, was here yesterday, and inquired for the Miss Morgans, saying they were the most charming young ladies he had ever met. On what he founded his opinion, or how he happened to inquire for us in this part of the country, I cannot imagine. The General brings news of the boys from Jackson. He there met an officer who left Stonewall Jackson's command on the 2nd instant, and says Gibbes was unhurt, God be praised. Another saw George a week ago in Richmond, still lame, as the cap of his knee had slipped in that fall last spring. Of Jimmy we hear not a word, not even as to where he is. It seems as though we are destined never to hear again. September 20th, Saturday. General Carter has just received a letter from Lydia, which contains what to me is the most melancholy intelligence, the news of the death of Eugene Fowler, who was killed on the 22nd of August in some battle or skirmish in Virginia. Poor Eugene! Does it not seem that this war will sweep off all who are nearest and dearest, as well as most worthy of life, leaving only those you least care for unharmed? September 21st. After supper last night, by way of variety, Anna, Miriam, and I came up to our room, and after undressing, commenced popping corn and making candy in the fireplace. We had scarcely commenced when 3 officers were announced, who found their way to the house to get some supper, they having very little chance of reaching Clinton before morning, as the cars had run off the track. Of course we could not appear, and they brought bad luck with them, for our corn would not pop, and our candy burned, while to add to our distress, the odor of broiled chicken and hot biscuit was wafted upstairs after a while, in the most provoking way. In vain we sent the most pathetic appeals by each servant for a biscuit apiece, after our hard work. Mrs. Carter was obdurate until, tired out with our messages, she at last sent us an empty jelly cup, a shred of chip beef, 2 polished drumsticks, and half a biscuit divided in 3. With that bountiful repast we were forced to be content and go to bed. At sunrise this morning, Mrs. Carter left to go down to her father in Iberville to see her stepmother, who is expected to die. Scarcely had she gone, when 6 more officers and soldiers came in from the still stationary cars to get their breakfast. We heard that Mr. Marsden, too, was down there, so the General sent him a nice breakfast, and I sent my love with it, but he had already breakfasted at Mr. Elder's. As soon as they left, we prepared for church, and just as we were ready, Captain Brown and Mr. Addison were announced. The doctor greeted us with an elegant bow, but they did not remain long, as we were about going out. Many officers were in church, and as I passed out, Colonel Breaux joined me and escorted Miriam and me to the carriage, where we stood talking some time under the trees before getting in. He gave us a most pressing invitation to name a day to visit the camp, that he might have the pleasure of showing us the fortifications, and we said we would beg the General's permission to do so. Charming Colonel Breaux! Like all nice men, he is married, of course. He and another officer drove just behind our carriage in coming home, until we came to the fork of the road. Then, leaning from their buggy, both gentlemen bowed profoundly, which we as cordially returned. 2 more behind followed their example, and to our great surprise, 10, who were seated in a small wagon drawn by 2 diminutive mules, bowed also, and not content with that, rose to their feet as the distance between the 2 roads increased, and raised their caps, though in the most respectful silence. Rather queer, and I would have said impertinent had they been any others than Confederates fighting for us, who, of course, are privileged people. September 24th. Yesterday the General saluted us with, "Young ladies, if you will ride in a Confederate carriage, you may go to dress parade this evening." Now, in present phraseology, "Confederate" means anything that is rough, unfinished, unfashionable, or poor. You hear of Confederate dresses, which means last year's; Confederate bridle means a rope halter; Confederate silver, a tin cup or spoon; Confederate flour is corn meal, etc. In this case, the Confederate carriage is a Jersey wagon with 4 seats, a top of hickory slats covered with leather, and the whole drawn by mules. We accepted gladly, partly for the ride and sight, partly to show we were not ashamed of a very comfortable conveyance. So with Mrs. Badger as chaperone, we went off in grand style. I must say I felt rather abashed, and wished myself at home as we drove into town, and had the gaze of a whole regiment riveted on us. But soon the men fell in line, and I did not feel so painfully conspicuous. I was amused at a contrast near by, too. There was but 1 carriage present besides ours, though there were half a dozen ladies on horseback. This carriage was a very fine one, and in it sat 3 of the ugliest, dowdiest, worst dressed females I ever saw. We 3 girls sat in our rough carriage as comfortable as could be, dressed well, we could not have been dressed better, and looking our very best. Sans mentir, I think the Confederates were much the most respectable. And what a sad sight the 4th Louisiana was, that was then parading. Men that had fought at Shiloh and Baton Rouge were barefooted. Rags was their only uniform, for very few possessed a complete suit, and those few wore all varieties of colors and cuts. Hats could be seen of every style and shape, from the first ever invented down to the last one purchased, evidently some time since. Yet he who had no shoes looked as happy as he who had; and he who had a cap had something to toss up, that's all. 4 or 5 we knew gathered around our vehicle and talked to us. Mr. Houston told me he heard I had been thrown, severely injured, had a narrow escape, etc. Was not thrown; saddle turned. A few steps off we recognized Mr. Scales. He would stare very hard at us, and if we turned towards him, would look quickly the other way, as though afraid to meet our gaze. Presently he gave us an opportunity, and we bowed. He came forward eagerly, blushing deeply, and looking very much pleased, and shook hands with us, and remained some time talking. He said he had not heard of our arrival, but would call as soon as possible. Mr. Talbot had rejoined Breckinridge. Having seen the last of that parade, he invited us to see that of his sailors, which was next, but it was too far; so we turned off to see Colonel Breaux's, a mile away. His, the 30th Louisiana, is a beautiful encampment on a large open common. Parade was almost over as we reached there, and soon the Colonel came to meet us. I did not look at the drill; I was watching the hundreds of tents, it looked like a great many, and was wondering how men could live in such places, and was trying to fancy what George's or Gibbes's looked like. It was pleasant to watch the barefoot soldiers race around like boys let loose from school, tossing caps and chips at 2 old gray geese that flew in circles around the encampment, just as though they had never had more earnest work. One gray headed man stood in the door of his tent, while a black headed young one danced before him to his own whistle, with his arms akimbo. Altogether it was a very pretty picture; but poor men! How can they be happy in these tents? End of Book 3, Part 6. Part 7 of A Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 3, Part 7, September 26th to October 2nd, 1862. September 26th, Friday. Sarah Morgan, X. My mark finds me at Linwood, though I had not the slightest idea that it would. Wonder where 20 pages beyond will find me. At home, I hope and pray, though I am as happy here as I could possibly be in any place on earth. Stirring news from our armies comes pouring in. Sunday, Colonel Breaux told me of Wool's defeat, and the great number of prisoners, cannon, and the large supplies of stores and ammunition that we had captured. Then Tuesday we heard of 3 great battles in Maryland, the third one still continuing, but no particulars of any of them. Yesterday came tidings of our having recrossed the Potomac, and today we hear that McClellan's army has been cut to pieces, but whether it is the same old fight or a new one, I cannot as yet learn, for reliable information is not easily obtained in America at this period. Did I ever record how little truth there was in any of that last Clinton news? It speaks for itself, though. Not a boat lay at Baton Rouge. Camp Moore was not even threatened. Ponchatoula Station was burned, but the one battery was retaken by our men the same night. But still these false reports cannot equal the Yankees. Take, for instance, the report of the captain of the Essex. I give General Carter as my authority. The captain reports having been fired on by a battery of 36 large guns at Port Hudson some weeks ago, when he opened fire and silenced them one after the other from the first to the last. Not a shot from the Rebel batteries reached them, and not a casualty on their side occurred. But the loss of the Confederates must have been awful. He came within I forget how many yards from the shore, and there was not a live man to be seen. He did not mention if there were any dead ones. Now for the other side. There were but 4 guns mounted there at the time. Shot and shell from those 4 certainly reached something, for one was seen to enter a porthole, from whence issued frightful shrieks soon after, and it is well known that the Essex is so badly injured by something as to be in a sinking condition, and only kept afloat by a gunboat lashed to either side. If she is uninjured, why did she not return and burn Natchez as she announced? In leaving Port Hudson, where not a live man was to be seen, nor a dead one to be found, she stopped at Mr. Babin's, just below Dr. Nolan's, where she remained the rest of the day. After she left, being curious to discover the reason of her short stay, Mr. Babin walked to the place where she had been, and discovered 16 fresh graves on the bank. If they buried them as they did at Baton Rouge and Vicksburg, 4 in a grave, how many would they be? But granting there were but 16, would that prove the veracity of the Captain? Poor man! Perhaps he is related to Pope, and cannot help himself. September 27th. I often wonder how lies first came into the world, and whether those who originate them do not believe them as firmly as any one else would believe truth. Lying seems to be the common creed of children and servants. Anna told me of having heard Lennis tell the other servants that she knew there were spirits, because I often talked to them. Every morning and evening I walked to the graveyard with a basket of flowers, and would sit by Father's and Harry's graves, and call their spirits to me, and they would all fly to me, and talk and sing with me for hours, until I would tell them good bye and go home, when they would go away too. I suppose the ignorant girl, having foundation enough from my frequent visits there, which were most often alone, made up the rest to account for my never seeming to like company out there. The fervent "Good Lord!" with which the tale was received by the other servants, and the full credence they gave it, might have proved unpleasant if further circulated; and I believe some members of the family found it necessary to put an end to it at once. And speaking of the graveyard recalls something I heard for the first time last night. Miriam was telling me that Tiche had asked if we knew that Mr. Sparks had visited Harry's grave; that he had got a basket of flowers from the Davidsons, and had made their driver carry it for him; and the man had told her that after filling the vases with roses, and spreading them over the grave, he had thrown himself on it with a shriek of despair, calling on Harry to forgive him; that it was only because forced by his father that he had killed him, and calling on God to prove that he would give his life gladly to recall Harry's. The man thought him a raving maniac, and fled in terror. Miriam asked Fanny if it was true, and she said yes; she had gathered the flowers for him herself. I saw them there, but little knew whose hand had brought them. I perceived at once that they were not mine, and touched even to tears by so silent an offering from an unknown person, I said, "It is some woman's work. God bless the hand that laid them there." I cannot say how much that little tribute affected me; and Mr. Sparks, I do not retract the blessing now. No. God have mercy on him, has been my prayer ever since I knew what an awful loss you had caused us. God knows that I never even desired this revenge, remorse standing over his grave. It has ever been, God pity and forgive; never yet for an instant, God pursue and avenge. September 28th. We were roused up at 4 o'clock last night by the arrival of Lydia and Eugene Carter, the first from Virginia and the second from Tennessee, and of course there was very little sleep for any of us, so anxious were we to hear the news they brought. First, I learned that Gibbes was safe up to the 17th; That George, in spite of the advice of his surgeon, had rejoined Stonewall Jackson in Maryland, and Jimmy was midshipman on the ironclad Palmetto State at Charleston. How thankful I was to hear that much, I need not say. Lydia said they all three looked remarkably well, Jimmy handsomer than ever. After that, news of all kinds came indiscriminately. The boys were very anxious about us, but had no idea of our misfortunes or whereabouts. They believed us still in Baton Rouge, and feared we had been there during the battle. Lydia only heard of our house having been plundered when she reached Alabama, so of course they are still ignorant of it. They were all very homesick, but said that we were their only trouble. A few of the C.'s stories had reached them through brother officers, and George swore to make himself understood by those ladies, if he ever saw them again. A gentleman from Cooper's Wells told Lydia that they never tired of repeating their stories to every new arrival, and no man was suffered to depart without having heard a few. If a gentleman friend of ours, or the boys, inquired if they knew the Miss Morgans of Baton Rouge, "Oh, yes," would be the answer, "intimately. But you know they have turned Yankee; received Federal officers every day, and placed all their property under Yankee protection. I" or my sister, as it happened, who was retailing the lie, meaning Mrs. S slept in their house when it was surrounded by a Yankee guard. Oh, they are perfectly in favor of the Yankees, and so on. Think of a common low soldier, who stopped for buttermilk somewhere where Anna was, introducing the subject. "It is all false," Anna interrupted. The man answered, "Oh, miss, you don't suppose we believe it. We do not believe such stories of any young ladies, much less these; for if they are true, their conduct must have been perfectly disgraceful. But though we know these stories to be lies, it does not prevent their being discussed in camp." Lydia saw Mr. McG too, at Lynchburg, who sent me his regards. Poor fellow! He says he still has dreams. He told her a few, but she says they were chiefly about meeting me at a ball, when I always treated him with the most freezing coldness. The same old nightmare! How often he has told me of that same dream that tormented him 18 months ago. He says he often thinks of me now, and he still dreams of me. Dreams are baseless fabrics whose timbers are mere moonbeams. Apply your own proverb. A clatter of hoofs down the road, and bent over the window sill which is my desk, my fingers are not presentable with the splattering of this vile pen in consequence of my position. 2 hours yet before sundown, so of course I am not dressed. They come nearer still. Now I see them, Dr. Addison and Mr. M. I shall not hurry my toilet for them. It will take some time to comb my hair, too. Wish I could remain up here. Tuesday, September 30th. It required very little persuasion to induce those gentlemen to stay to supper the other evening, and it was quite late before they took their leave. Dr. Addison I was very much pleased with, and so were all the rest. Mr. M none of us fell desperately in love with. He is too nonchalant and indifferent, besides having a most peculiar pronunciation which grated harshly on my ears, and that no orthography could fully express. Garb, for instance, was distorted into gairb, yard into yaird, Arkansas, and all such words that I can only imitate by a violent dislocation of my lower jaw that puts Anna into convulsions of laughter, only she would laugh the same if it was not funny. This Kentuckian pronunciation grates hairshly on my Southern ears. Miriam addressed herself exclusively to the doctor, so I was obliged to confine my attention entirely to neglected Mr. M, in which pious duty I was ably and charitably seconded by the General. Speaking of the bravery and daring displayed by the Southern soldiers during this war, Mr. M mentioned the dangerous spot he had seen us in the first day we went down to the Arkansas, and said that, lying directly across the point from the Essex, they expected every instant to see one of her shells explode among us, and were very uneasy about our position, as we did not seem to know the danger. I asked him if he had observed anything peculiar among the dozen planters and overseers standing a short distance from us, when the Captain sent us word that our position was a very dangerous one, as they expected the Essex to open fire every instant, and we had best stand below the levee higher up, where we would be safe from shells. I noticed that before any of you understood your position, every man had disappeared as though by magic. Now I had noticed that myself. When I turned, under shelter of the levee, our gallant planters were galloping off in the distance. While Ginnie and I looked and laughed, we suddenly found ourselves the sole objects on the horizon. The other girls were in the road below, going carelessly toward the carriage. So we followed, having lost sight of the brave representatives of Southern chivalry, being the last to leave the supposed field of danger. To my former remark, let me add that there is only one set who take better care for their safety than married women, and that set is composed exclusively of the home guard. Timid girls, either through ignorance or fun, compose the majority of the brave men that the volunteer service has not absorbed. October 1st, Wednesday. Just after sunset yesterday, Anna and I were walking down the road towards the sugar house, she reading occasionally from Abbott's Napoleon, and then pausing for me to explain the very difficult passages she could not understand, when we suddenly became aware of the approach of a horse, and raising our bowed heads, beheld Colonel Breaux and another before us, to our infinite surprise and astonishment. The Colonel sprang from his horse and advanced on foot. His companion slowly followed his example, and was introduced as Captain Morrison. We adjourned our historical fit for some future period, and walked home with the gentlemen. Miriam did not get back from her excursion to the cane patch until it was quite late, when, after sitting down a few moments, she ran upstairs to change her dress. She had just put it on an hour before, but nothing would do but she must dress up fine, so she put on her handsomest organdie. In vain I pointed to my simple pink muslin with a white body that I had worn all day, and begged she would not make the contrast between us more striking than ever, as I felt I could not change it without exciting remark. She was obdurate, dressed herself in gorgeous array, and, as usual, I looked like her lady's maid. Colonel Breaux paid my hair the most extravagant compliments. He said he could not say his prayers for looking at it in church, Sunday before last. Perhaps that is the reason St. Paul said a woman should not worship in church with her head uncovered. But as the Yankees stole my bonnet, I am reduced to wearing my black straw walking hat with its curled brim, trimmed in black ribbon with golden sheaves of wheat. 2 years ago this fall, father threw me a banknote at table, and I purchased this with it. Now it is my only headgear, except a sunbonnet. Before leaving, which was not until quite late, this evening was named for our ride to the fortifications, to our infinite delight, as we have dreamed and talked of nothing else for a week. A dispatch just received from Gibbes, from Mobile, on his way home. I am so happy! But what can bring him? I fear Lydia has gone to Clinton to meet him at Lily's. October 2nd, Thursday. With what extraordinary care we prepared for our ride yesterday! One would have thought that some great event was about to take place. But in spite of our long toilet, we stood ready equipped almost an hour before Colonel Breaux arrived. I was standing in a novel place, upon the banisters, looking over the fields to see if he was coming, and not seeing him, made some impatient exclamation, when lo! he appeared before me, having only been concealed by the wood pile, and, O my prophetic soul! Captain Morrison was by his side. There was quite a cavalcade of us. Mr. Carter and his wife, Mrs. Badger and Mrs. Worley in 2 buggies, the 3 boys, who of course followed on horseback, and the 2 gentlemen, Miriam, Anna, and I, riding also. It was really a very pretty sight, when Captain Morrison and I, who took the lead going, would reach the top of one of the steep hills, and look down on the procession in the hollow below. Fortunately, it was a very cloudy evening, for starting at 4, it would have been very unpleasant to ride that distance with the sun in our faces. As we reached the town, we heard the loud report of 2 cannon, which caused the elder ladies to halt and suggest the propriety of a return; but if it was a gunboat, that was the very thing I was anxious to see, so we hurried on to the batteries. It proved to be only practicing, however. At the first one we stopped at, the crew of the Arkansas were drilling. After stopping a while there, we followed the river to see the batteries below. It was delightful to ride on the edge of a high bluff with the muddy Mississippi below, until you fancied what would be the probable sensation if the horse should plunge down into the waters. Then it ceased to be so pleasant. The great strong animal I rode could have carried me over without a protest on my part; for the ridiculous bit in his mouth was by no means suited to his strength, and it would require a more powerful arm than mine to supply the deficiency. Miriam had generously sacrificed her own comfort to give him to me, and rode Fiery Joe instead of her favorite; but it was by no means a comfort to me. Then Anna was not reconciled to her pony while I was on such a fine horse, until I proposed an exchange, and gladly dismounted near an old mill 2½ miles below Port Hudson, as we returned home. In leaving the town, we lost sight of the buggies, as there was no carriage road that might follow the bluff; and though there was one just back, we never saw our buggies again. Once, following a crescent, far below us lay the water batteries concealed by the trees that grew by the water's edge, looking, from where we stood, like quite a formidable precipice. Then, still beyond, after leaving the river, we passed through a camp where the soldiers divided their attention equally between eating their supper and staring at us in the most profound silence. Then through an old gate, down a steep hill, past a long line of rifle pits, a winding road, and another camp where more men stared and cooked their supper, we came to the last battery but one, which lay so far below that it was too late to visit it. We returned highly delighted with what we had seen, and our pleasant ride. It was late when we got back, as altogether our ride had been some 15 miles in length. As soon as we could exchange our habits for our evening dresses, we rejoined our guests at the supper table, where none of us wanted for an appetite except poor Captain Morrison, who could not be tempted by the dishes we so much relished. After supper, Colonel Breaux and I got into a discussion; rather, he talked, while I listened with eyes and ears, with all my soul. What I would not give for such knowledge! He knows everything, and can express it all in the clearest, purest language, though he says he could not speak a word of English at 14. The discussion commenced by some remark I made about physiognomy. He took it up, and passed on to phrenology, in which he is no great believer. From there he touched on the mind, and I listened, entranced, to him. Presently he asserted that I possessed reasoning faculties, which I fear me I very rudely denied. You see, every moment the painful conviction of my ignorance grew more painful still, until it was most humiliating; and I repelled it rather as a mockery. He described for my benefit the process of reasoning, the art of thinking. I listened more attentively still, resolving to profit by his words. Then he turned the conversation on quite another theme. Health was the subject. He delicately alluded to my fragile appearance, and spoke of the necessity of a strong constitution to sustain a vigorous mind. If the mind prevailed over a weak body, in its turn it became affected by decay, and would eventually lose its powers. It was applicable to all cases; he did not mean that I was sickly, but that my appearance bespoke one who had not been used to the exercise that was most necessary for me. Horseback rides, walks, fresh air were necessary to preserve health. No man had greater disgust for a freckled face than he, but a fair face could be preserved by the most ordinary precautions, and even improved by such exercise. He illustrated my case by showing the difference between the flower growing in the sunshine and that growing in a cellar. Father's own illustration and very words, when he so often tried to impress on me the necessity of gaining a more robust frame than nature had bestowed. And a letter he had made Hal write me, showing the danger of such neglect, rose before me. I forgot Colonel Breaux; I remembered only the ardent desire of those two, who seemed to speak to me through his lips. It produced its effect. I felt the guilt I had incurred by not making greater efforts to gain a more robust frame, and putting on my sunbonnet as I arose from the breakfast table this morning, I took my seat here on the wide balcony, where I have remained seated on the floor ever since, with a chair for a desk, trying to drink an extra amount of fresh air. I was sorry when Colonel Breaux arose to take his leave. As he took my hand, I said earnestly, "Thank you for giving me something to think about." He looked gratified, made some pleasant remark, and after talking a while longer, said good night again, and rode off. While undressing, Miriam and I spoke of nothing else; and when I lay down and looked in my own heart, and saw my shocking ignorance and pitiful inferiority so painfully evident even to my own eyes, I actually cried. Why was I denied the education that would enable me to be the equal of such a man as Colonel Breaux and the others? He says the woman's mind is the same as the man's, originally; it is only education that creates the difference. Why was I denied that education? Who is to blame? Have I exerted fully the natural desire to know that is implanted in all hearts? Have I done myself injustice in my self taught ignorance, or has injustice been done to me? "Where is the fault?" I cried. "Have I labored to improve the few opportunities thrown in my path to the best of my ability? Answer for yourself. With the exception of 10 short months at school, where you learned nothing except arithmetic, you have been your own teacher, your own scholar, all your life, after you were taught by mother the elements of reading and writing. Give an account of your charge. What do you know?" "Nothing, except that I am a fool." And I buried my face in the sheet. I did not like even the darkness to see me in my humiliation. End of Book 3, Part 7. Part 8 of A Confederate Girl's Diary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Confederate Girl's Diary by Sarah Morgan Dawson. Book 3, Part 8, October 4th to October 19th, 1862. October 4th, Saturday. While Anna and Miriam went out riding last evening, just as I put down my pen, I went out for a solitary walk down the road that Gibbes would have to pass, but saw nothing of the carriage. When I got back, they told me he was wounded. My fears were well founded, then. With what anxiety we waited for his coming it would be impossible to describe. Every wagon rattling through the fields made us stop and listen; every cane stalk waving in the moonlight brought us to our feet. At last, after supper, far off in the clear light, we saw the carriage. I could not sit still. I walked down the steps and stood under the tree in front, followed by Anna. I did not like her to stand nearer the spot where it would stop than I, even. All the rest remained on the balcony. We did not know how serious the wound might be; we must be careful. Eugene Carter advised caution for more reasons than one. "Look out!" he cried. "Suppose it should be Colonel Breaux?" "Then I am afraid the Colonel will get a kiss," I answered nervously, shuffling from one foot to the other. "But suppose it is Mr. M ?" he persisted. "Oh, thank you for the caution. I will look carefully before I greet him," I returned, moving to the other side, for nearer around the circle moved the carriage. I heard his voice. "Oh, Gibbes, where is it?" "Left shoulder, mere scratch," he answered. The carriage stopped. "Gibbes! Gibbes!" I cried. "My darling!" and he had his great strong arm around me. The left was hanging in a sling. Slowly the others moved down the steps towards him. What a meeting! My heart was in my throat, I was so happy. Every one caught the well hand, and kissed him again and again, and every one shrunk from that left side. I had almost forgotten my "Gyr Lygia" in my excitement. We followed him on the balcony, and put him in a chair near the steps. I pulled off his hat and coat, and knelt in front of him with my arms across his lap, to get near enough. Miriam stood on the steps with his arm around her shoulder, and Lydia near. The others stood around. Altogether it was a happy group that performed in the tableau of "The Soldier's Return." Presently the negroes gathered, too. "How is you, Mass' Gibbes?" in all imaginable keys and accents was heard, while the Captain shook hands with each, and inquired into their own state of health. But even wounded soldiers can eat, so supper was again prepared. I am afraid it gave me too much pleasure to cut up his food. It was very agreeable to butter his cornbread, carve his mutton, and spread his preserves. But I doubt whether it could be so pleasant to a strong man, accustomed to do such small services for himself. We listened to him talk, but though it was evident from his slow, deliberate speech, so different from his ordinary habit, that he was suffering, yet I felt impatient when he was interrupted by any commonplace observation by any one of us. I wanted to learn something of his exploits. Much knowledge I obtained. He was wounded at Sharpsburg on the 17th September, at 9 in the morning. That is all the information I got concerning himself. One would imagine that the 17 months that have elapsed since we last met had been passed in a prolonged picnic. Concerning others, he was quite communicative. Father Hubert told him he had seen George in the battle, and he had come out safe. Gibbes did not even know that he was in it until then. Our army, having accomplished its object, recrossed the Potomac after what was decidedly a drawn battle. Both sides suffered severely. Hardly an officer on either side escaped unhurt. Mr. McGimsey is wounded, and Major Herron reported killed. I expect the list will contain the names of many friends when it comes. I have just come from seeing Gibbes's wound dressed. If that is a scratch, Heaven defend me from wounds! A minié ball struck his left shoulder strap, which caused it to glance, thereby saving the bone. Just above, in the fleshy part, it tore the flesh off in a strip 3 inches and a half by 2. Such a great, raw, green, pulpy wound, bound around by a heavy red ridge of flesh. Mrs. Badger, who dressed it, turned sick. Miriam turned away groaning. Servants exclaimed with horror. It was the first experience of any, except Mrs. Badger, in wounds. I wanted to try my nerves, so I held the towel around his body and kept the flies off while it was being washed. He talked all the time, ridiculing the groans of sympathy over a "scratch," and oh, how I loved him for his fortitude! It is so offensive that the water trickling on my dress has obliged me to change it. October 6th. Last night I actually drew from Gibbes the outlines of Jackson's campaign. He told me of some heroic deeds of his fellow soldiers, but of his own, not a word. I have seen his name too often in the papers to believe that he has no deeds of his own to relate, if he only would. October 9th, Thursday. It is astonishing what a quantity of fresh air has been consumed by me since I formed that wise resolution. The supply must be largely increased to keep up with the demand. Perhaps that is the cause of all these clouds and showers. I must be making a severe drain on the economy of heaven. From breakfast to dinner I remain on the balcony and read aloud several chapters of the "Memoirs" of Dumas, by way of practice. A dictionary lies by me, and I suffer no word to pass without a perfect definition. Then comes my French grammar, which I study while knitting or sewing, which takes very nearly until dinner time. After that I do as I please, either reading or talking, until sunset, when we can ride or walk, the walk being always sweetened with sugar cane. The evening we always spend on the balcony. Is that grand air enough? Ô mon teint, je serai joliment brune. We three girls occupy the same room since Gibbes's arrival, and have ever so much fun and not half enough sleep. I believe the other two complain of me as the cause, but I plead not guilty. I never was known to laugh aloud, no matter how intense might have been my mirth. It won't come as Gibbes murmured last night while reading aloud Artemus Ward's last letter, when we discovered it was suppressed laughter rather than suppressed pain that caused him to writhe so. On the other hand, Anna and Miriam laugh as loud and lustily as daughters of the Titans, if the respectable gentleman had daughters. I confess to doing more than half the talking, but as to the laugh that follows, not a bit. Last night I thought they would go wild, and I, too, laughed myself into silent convulsions when I recited an early effusion of my poetic muse for their edification. Miriam made the bedstead prance fairly, while Anna's laugh sounded like a bull of Bashan, with his head in a bolster case. Saturday, October 11th. Miriam went off to Clinton before daylight yesterday with Mr. Carter and Mrs. Worley. She would not let me go for fear mother should keep us. At midnight they got back last night, tired, sleepy, and half frozen, for our first touch of cool weather came in a strong north wind in the evening, which grew stronger and stronger through the night, and they had worn only muslin dresses. I shall never cease to regret that I did not go too. Miriam says mother is looking very sad, and I am trying to forget all our troubles, and am so happy here. O mother, how selfish it was to leave you! I ask myself whether it were best to stay there, where we could only be miserable without adding anything to your comfort or pleasure, or to be here, careless and happy, while you are in that horrid hole so sad and lonesome. According to my theory, Miriam would remind me that I say it is better to have 3 miserable persons than 2 happy ones, whose happiness occasions the misery of the third. That is my doctrine only in peculiar cases; it cannot be applied to this one. I say that if, for example, Miriam and I should love the same person, while that person loved only me, rather than make her unhappy by seeing me marry him, I would prefer making both him and myself miserable by remaining single. She says, "Fudge!" which means, I suppose, nonsense. But our happiness here does not occasion mother's unhappiness. She would rather see us enjoying ourselves here than moping there. One proof is that she did not suggest our return. She longs to get home, but cannot leave poor Lilly alone, for Charlie is in Granada. Oh, how willingly I would return to the old wreck of our home! All its desolation could not be half so unendurable as Clinton. But Lilly cannot be left. Poor Lilly! When I look at her sad young face, my heart bleeds for her. With 5 helpless little children to care for, is she not to be pitied? I think that such a charge, in such dreadful days, would kill me. How patiently she bears it! Thursday, October 16th. It seems an age since I have opened this book. How the time has passed since, I have but a vague idea, beyond that it has passed very pleasantly. Once since, I have been with Mrs. Badger to a Mr. Powell, who has started quite an extensive shoemaking establishment, in the vain attempt to get something to cover my naked feet. I am so much in need that I have been obliged to borrow Lydia's shoes every time I have been out since she returned. This was my second visit there, and I have no greater satisfaction than I had at first. He got my measure, I got his promise, and that is the end of it, thus far. His son, a young man of about 24, had the cap of his knee shot off at Baton Rouge. Ever since, he has been lying on his couch unable to stand, and the probability is that he will never stand again. Instead of going out to the manufactory, Mrs. Badger has each time stopped at the house to see his mother, who, by the way, kissed me and called me "Sissy," to my great amusement, and there I have seen this poor young man. He seems so patient and resigned that it is really edifying to be with him. He is very communicative, too, and seems to enjoy company, no matter if he does say "her'n" and "his'n." Wonder why he doesn't say "shiz'n," too? The girls are highly amused at the description I give of my new acquaintance, but still more so at Mrs. Badger's account of the friendship of this poor young cripple, and his enjoyment of my visits. Of course it is only her own version, as she is very fond of jokes of all kinds. Night before last, Lydia got playing the piano for me in the darkened parlor, and the old tunes from her dear little fingers sent me off in a sea of dreams. She too caught the vision, and launched off in a well remembered quadrille. The same scene flashed on us, and at each note almost we would recall a little circumstance, charming to us, but unintelligible to Anna, who occupied the other side. Together we talked over the dramatis personae. Mrs. Morgan, Jr., in a dark blue silk with black flounces, a crimson chenille net on her black hair, sits at the piano in her own parlor. On the Brussels carpet stands, among others, Her Majesty Queen Miriam, in a lilac silk, with bare neck and arms save for the protection afforded by a bertha of appliqué lace trimmed with pink ribbon, with hair à la Madonna, and fastened low on her neck. Is she not handsome as she stands fronting the folding doors, her hand in tall Mr. Trezevant's, just as she commences to dance, with the tip of her black bottine just showing? Vis à vis stands pretty Sophie, with her large, graceful mouth smiling and showing her pretty teeth to best advantage. A low neck and short sleeved green and white poplin is her dress, while her black hair, combed off from her forehead carelessly, is caught by a comb at the back, and falls in curls on her shoulders. A prettier picture could not be wished for, as she looks around with sparkling eyes, eager for the dance to begin. There stands calm Dina, in snuff colored silk, looking so immeasurably the superior of her partner, who, I fancy, rather feels that she is the better man of the two, from his nervous way of shifting from one foot to the other without saying a word to her. Nettie, in lilac and white, stands by the mantel, laughing undisguisedly at her partner rather than with him, yet so good humoredly that he cannot take offense, but rather laughs with her. Lackadaisical Gertrude, whose face is so perfect in the daytime, looks pale and insipid by gaslight, and timidly walks through the dance. Stout, good natured Minna smiles and laughs, never quite completing a sentence, partly from embarrassment, partly because she hardly knows how, but still so sweet and amiable that one cannot find fault with her for so trifling a misfortune. At this point Lydia suggests, "And Sarah, do you forget her?" I laugh. How could I forget? There she stands in a light blue silk checked in tiny squares, with little flounces up to her knee. Her dress fits well, and she wears very pretty sleeves and a collar of appliqué. Lydia asks if that is all, and how she looks. "The same old song," I answer. "She is looking at Miriam just now. You would hardly notice her, but certainly her hair is well combed." That is all you can say for her. Who is she dancing with? A youth fond of dreams, futile ones at that, I laughingly reply. He must be relating one just now, for there is a very perceptible curl on her upper lip, and she is looking at him as though she thought she was the tallest. Lydia dashes off into a lively jig. "Ladies to the right!" I cried. She laughed too, well knowing that that part of the dance was invariably repeated a dozen times at least. She looked slyly up. "I am thinking of how many hands I saw squeezed," she said. I am afraid it did happen once or twice. 18 months ago. What a change! One who was prominent on such occasions, Mr. Sparks, they tell me is dead. May God have mercy on his soul, in the name of Jesus Christ! I did not ask even this revenge. October 18th, Saturday. Last night mother arrived from Clinton with Gibbes and Lydia, who had gone there the day before to get her to go to Baton Rouge. Clinton, October 19th, Sunday. What an unexpected change! I am surprised myself. Yesterday, as the Baton Rouge party were about leaving, Miriam thought Lilly would be lonesome alone here with her sick baby, and decided that we should leave by the cars and stay with her until mother returned. There was no time to lose, so dressing in haste, we persuaded Anna to accompany us, and in a few moments stood ready. We walked down to the overseer's house to wait for the cars, and passed the time most agreeably in eating sugar cane, having brought a little negro expressly to cut it for us and carry our carpet bag. 3 young ladies, who expected to be gone from Saturday until Wednesday, having but one carpet bag between them! Can it be credited? But then we knew we had clothes here, and depended upon them for supplies, when we now find they are in the trunk, and mother has the key. We walked aboard alone in the crowded train, and found ourselves in the only car reserved for ladies, which was already filled with a large party returning from Port Hudson, consisting of the fastest set of girls that I have seen for some time. Anna and I had to content ourselves with a seat on a small box between the benches, while Miriam was established on the only vacant one, with a sick soldier lying at her feet. The fast girls talked as loud as possible, and laughed in a corresponding style, in spite of the sick man. They must have been on a picnic, from the way they talked. One, in a short dress, complained that she had not seen her sweetheart. A pert little miss of 13 cried, "You can bet your head I never went to any place where I did not see one of my sweethearts." One of about 17, a perfect beauty, declared she would die of thirst. "So will I, and I don't want to die before I get a husband," exclaimed her vis à vis. They evidently expected to produce an impression on us. At every brilliant remark stupid, understood they looked at us to see what we thought. All of them sat with bare heads in the strong light, an unfailing proof of la basse classe on steamers and cars. Every time my veil blew aside, they made no difficulty about scanning my features, as though they thought it might be agreeable. I must confess I was equally impolite in regard to the beauty, but then her loveliness was an excuse, and my veil sheltered me besides. While this young Psyche was fascinating me with her perfect face and innocent expression, one of her companions made a remark, one that I dare say is made every day, and that I never imagined could be turned into harm. My beauty uttered a prolonged "Oh!" of horror, and burst out laughing, followed by all the others. My disgust was unspeakable. Mock modesty is always evident. A modest girl could not have noticed the catch. The immodest, on the lookout for such an opportunity, was the only one who could have perceived it. Well, after all, no one can be perfect. This may be the single stain on my beauty, though I confess I would rather have any other failing than this, almost. Putting this aside, I hardly know which I was most amused by, the giddy, lively girls to my right, or the two ladies to my left, who were as cross and ill natured as two old cats, and railed unmercifully at the silly creatures behind them, and carried their spite so far as to refuse to drink, because the conductor, the husband of one of them, gave the young ladies water before passing it to their two elders. Didn't the poor man get it! She wouldn't taste a drop of that nasty, dirty drippings, that she wouldn't! Might have had the decency to attend to his kinsfolks before them creatures! And why didn't he wait on those two young ladies behind her? He did ask them? Well, ask them again! They must want some. Poor henpecked meekly passed the can again, to be again civilly declined. I confess the drippings were too much for me also, though I did not give it as my excuse. Mrs. Hen recommenced her pecking. Poor Mr. Hen at last surlily rejoined, "For heaven's sake, don't make a fuss in the cars!" with an emphasis on the last word that showed he was accustomed to it at home, at least. With my veil down, I leaned against the window, and remembering Colonel Breaux's remarks 2 nights before concerning cross people, I played his little philosopher for the remainder of the journey. At sunset we walked in at Lilly's gate, and astonished her by standing before her, as she sat alone with her poor sick little Beatrice in her arms. End of Book 3, Part 8.